My name is Gopika, and I have with me Sanjana and Soumya. And we were just doing a little shakeout, and I was reassuring them that this was a very informal conversation. But it's very hard to have a formal, informal conversation. So we still put down some pointers last night, some questions to help guide us. And I'm super excited to talk to you both. I had an opportunity to engage with your work, Soumya, I think mostly through this process, with Mavelinadu a little bit earlier. So I'm very, very excited to talk to you both. The way I had thought about this conversation was maybe asking both of you questions about your initiatives. And I also, having engaged with both of your work, found some connections. So I thought of maybe like inquiring a little bit more about that. And don't worry, you're not the only one with nerves. Can you hear my voice shaking? So we have our phones. I promise I'm not checking my WhatsApp. And thank you all for coming on a Sunday, what we consider morning in Bangalore. For those of you who are out queer tangoing last night, yeah, thank you for joining us. So I'm actually going to start with you, Sanjana. Tell us a little bit about the genesis of Mavelinadu, the collective, and why did you feel that like a publication or an online platform was the best way for you to share your political voice as a collective? I would personally love to know a little bit more about that.
Hi. So I think Mavelinadu started, and you're the only one who says it like with the accent.
I'm a Malayali,
Yeah.
so
I've gotten very used to saying Mavelinadu, just so people get what I'm saying. We kind of came together, I think, towards the end of 2020. And the three of us, me, Ajinkya, Shrujana, we were kind of trying to figure out what to do because we wanted to start something of our own, and we kind of knew that we wanted it to be a space for knowledge production. And I feel like that's important. That was important to us for two reasons. I think one is obviously that the way that caste has existed in India for so long, knowledge is something that has been kept away from people from marginalized castes. And so there's like a systemic gap there where I feel like a lot of the discourse is controlled by people of upper castes, and whether it's university spaces or like publishing spaces or whatever it is, it's like even for instance a discourse on decolonization, which is just overrun by mostly Brahmins and like kind of skates over caste so easily. And that's because there's vested interests there in maintaining those kind of, like maintaining the status quo essentially. So I think it was really important to reclaim that space and also be assertive at the same time. And also the other thing about knowledge is that Bahujan folks have had their own significant amount of knowledge that, whether it's artisans or like builders and like all of the sort of artistic work of creation has often been done by Bahujan folks, and that's also something that needs to be recorded. So I guess there's like two ways that we thought that this was really important, and that's why a publication made the most sense, because we wanted to create a space for knowledge production, essentially, that where we have like a say in what we create.
And your role in the collective is?
I
forgot to ask you that. Yeah,
I'm the editor, and we have like 4 kind of core members and other sort of consultants. So that's how we kind of function. It's like a very small like organization.
And just out of curiosity, you hear the word collective. Sandbox Collective is also a collective. How did you decide for it to be a collective? Or was that something that just came naturally to all of you?
I think any anti-caste space just ends up being like that often. So there was no kind of like deep thought process that went into this. It was just like, oh, we're a collective. Yeah, of course we are. Like, this is just a given. So I don't know how to, yeah. It's like,
That's fair. That's fair.
yeah.
Soumya, I'm coming over to you. So you have this amazing podcast, Atypical Dikkatein. Did I say it right? I didn't ask you earlier. So how did that come about? And we spoke about Mavelinadu as a publication. For you, it sort of came about as a podcast. And tell us about when it started and how you thought of it, how you conceptualized it.
I started for very selfish reasons. I was lonely. I was in pain. And then when I talked to fellow queer, neurodivergent, disabled people, I was like, okay, I'm not alone. We might have different-ish lived experiences, but there's some commonality which I could relate with. And there's a huge gap. Like there's no archive of these experiences. And even if it's there, it's like you have to say these in a certain way, right? You have to write it in a certain way. A lot of policing is there also when you go into publications. Something as simple as stammering, that's even looked down upon in schools. If you are stimming is like self-regulating behavior. If you look, I kind of rock a bit, so even yes, like it's all, the bodies are always policed. Don't shake your legs. And it's also very deeply tied to Brahmanism. Like girls are not supposed to do like this, you shouldn't shake it. And Lakshmi chali jati hai, like some sort of goddess. Lots of policing, yeah. I mean, I grew up with that, and that brought me shame. Like, why am I doing this? Even like day before yesterday, I was shaking my leg to soothe myself, and my grandmom was like, you don't do this. And I just snapped. I'm like, please don't do it, just don't touch me like that. Let me regulate. So yeah, people don't understand this, and people have a very skewed understanding of what is neurodivergence, right? So there's very stereotypical idea of what autism looks like, or ADHD. People are not even serious about it. They're like, it just happens to kids. So there's very little understanding. And in my family, when someone like my little sister, cousin sister, got diagnosed, and that time I was studying psychology in undergrad, and I just, being a neurodivergent person, I just deep dived into research. Let's see what is it. And I saw I did a lot of those things, of course, in a different ways. So that was always my secret, because the mental health professionals are not ready to talk about it. They will just talk about depression, anxiety, and all those stuff. And those are the consequences of navigating a neuronormative world as a neuro minority. So when I talked to my fellow queer, neurodivergent, disabled folks, I saw that these are rich experiences, and I was feeling a sense of community. I was not feeling alone. Otherwise I kind of like shame myself a lot. Something is wrong with me. Am I a freak or something? So then I was like, okay, let's archive it. So I was coming out of a kind of a toxic place that time. I quit my job that night. I remember a lot of ableism and stuff. So, and that time Point of View was coming up with this feminist tech grant, and I applied it on the same night. Like I literally trauma dumped in that application. And I got it. And last year during this time, 5th and 6th December, I was in Delhi for the workshop. And then the conceptualization happened. I talked to Arundhati Sridhar, who does Fursat Feminism. I also talked to Hina Siddiqui. She does Queer Lives with Hina. So I understood what are the softwares, how does one go about all those things. And yeah, in February earlier this year, I finally launched it. Initially, it was just for the community, so we are not alone. We feel, because after those conversations, we feel very validated. Even that is not there, and mental health services, they're also not accessible to everyone. So it started from there, and now it has taken a different kind of shape, where like it's become also a resource for other people. Some DI consulting company in Finland is using it as a resource on, like, neurodivergence. Another person from the community is writing a research paper. They did a podcast ethnography on the experiences, because again, neuroqueer experiences are nowhere. Should I tell more about neuroqueerness or?
Yeah, I was actually going to say you used a term neuronormative and neuroqueer. Could you tell us a bit about what that means to you?
So to put it simply, so there's this idea amongst people that there is a normal, there's an abnormal. So a majority of people who function in a certain kind of way, they have decided, okay, this is the quote unquote normal way to do things, and this is not the, just like shaking legs or like stimming. It's not, considered okay to do it in public, right? So those kinds of behaviors, how you talk, direct communication is looked down upon. I have a very weird example. I remember I was in eighth grade. I was one of the prefects, and I asked my new English teacher, "Sir, what's your name?" Just directly. He didn't answer me. The other guy who was also the prefect, he said, "Sir, may I know your name, please?" And he answered him. And I never understood what did I do wrong, you know. And then when I grew up and read, connected with people, finally had my own diagnosis, and the counselor explained it to me. I'm like, oh, so he took this, like he was offended that I asked it directly. It was disrespectful. And I'm like, wow. So there are these rules, unsaid rules and expectations, which are laid out by a majority of people, the neurocognitive majority, basically. So, and the neurodivergent folks who think, process, see the world in a different way. To put it simply, our brains are wired in a different way. We are kind of the minority. And when we talk about neuroqueerness, so both the queer community and the neurodivergent community, we are sort of challenging the binaries which are laid out in the society, right? Gender, sexuality, normal, abnormal. So these two communities are very closely interlinked. At least in my brain, I can't divorce my queerness, my gender, my sexuality from my neurodivergence, because of how my brain functions. I also question those norms. What is gender? What is sexuality? Why do I have to be put in a box? So to me, neuroqueerness has no definition as such. It's fluid, right? You can be anything you want to be without being forced into a label or a box. So it means different things to different individuals. I just want to be a star in a universe where I can be whatever the fuck I want to be. So that's queerness for me.
I love that. Did you say a star in the universe?
Yeah.
I love that. I love that. I'm going to say that to anybody who asks me what neuroqueerness is from now on. Thanks, Soumya. I'll come back to you in a sec. It also brought questions to my mind that both of you all through your work are also challenging binaries. This idea of what is normal, what is binary. I see that coming through both your work. So, Sanjana Mavelinadu, your first project is titled De-Brahmanizing Gender. And in the collective's words, it's an attempt to excavate our histories as well as write about our present while maintaining ownership of our work. So I'd love to know a little bit about what does de-Brahmanizing gender mean to you? Some folks may have their own ideas of what it means. And how do you see this work of the collective connected to this larger political struggle against Brahminical patriarchy? And I'm using the term Brahminical patriarchy intentionally, but I'd love for you to, talk a little bit about how this project of yours is connected to that larger struggle. So, yeah, a lot.
So there's actually this book called Debrahmanizing History, which is like an amazing book for anybody who wants to kind of get an academic and thorough understanding of what the word debrahmanizing means. But I think that in this country, everything, like caste is literally in everything, and caste almost like produces everything and kind of keeps it going, especially like systems of oppression, and everything is kind of like very deeply linked to caste. And we keep saying this really often, and like I think people get sick of it, but it's actually very true. And especially when it comes to gender, I feel like it's not like it's not as simple as like being cis or trans, or even being like man, woman, these sorts of binaries. I think that masculinities and femininities are also specific to caste. And I think that when you're a Brahmin masculinity is different from Kshatriya masculinity, from Shudra masculinity. So I feel like in a lot of ways, caste and gender sort of produce and sustain each other. And I think the idea of de-brownizing gender was to kind of take that, like dig a little deeper into how that happens, like the mechanisms of how that happens in specific contexts, because even context kind of changes everything, regions. And so we kind of try to do this like as in depth as we possibly could with the research projects and the pieces that were written under de-Brahmanizing gender. And I don't know if I explained it properly. Like, okay. And then, yeah, so this project was kind of an extension of that in print form for the first time. So these zines are also very specific experiences of gender non-conforming folks from the community. And it's their own very personal take on it. So that was really important. So yeah, that's.
And the second half around how you see that connected to broader struggles in India now around challenges that we experience in social movements around Brahminical patriarchy. How do you see your collective and your work sort of connecting with that, or sort of where do you exist in that universe as you see it?
I think within any movement, I think like there are a lot of different kind of branches and strands that kind of run parallelly, and they're all equally important. Like if you look at educate, agitate, organize, I mean, that's like sort of the three ways that a movement can go. Or even if you're talking about organizing on ground and advocacy, and like there are many different ways that a movement sort of manifests. And I think that knowledge production is one of those. So I think that how we sort of see ourselves is we're sort of trying to create a repository of knowledge, like a robust repository of knowledge that includes like has a lot of diversity within it, that people from the movement can also draw on when they need to speak about a very like a specific topic within when it comes to anti-caste discourse. So yeah, that's how we see ourselves.
Amazing. I think it's great too. If any of you haven't seen the zines, they're in the back there. But yeah, all of them very different, very sum up, very personal. Priyanka's is really looking at temples and drawing parallels between this idea of my body as a temple and how that equates to Brahminical ideas of Hinduism. So yeah, really amazing. Thank you for sharing. Soumya, I'm coming back to you. So you talk about neuroqueer intersectionality. What does that mean to you in theory and in practice? And how have you, we spoke about this a little bit yesterday, but I'd like you to speak about this in the larger audience. But how have you experienced the lack of it in feminist spaces? And what are some of the things that need to change to shift those sort of practices?
Okay, neuroqueering intersectionality. When like there's a lot of discussion around intersectionality, but it sometimes feels like it's kind of divisive also. So people use the term intersectionality to talk about these experiences, but I don't see collective liberation. That's something which is missing. You can't just fight for your struggles and leaves another one behind. And that's not how collective liberation works. Like we say, right, if one of us is not free, then no one is actually free, right? And this is what I mean, like given the broader socio-political context, religion is heavily used to police queer experiences. And those who, like research shows, queer people experience more anxiety, more depression, more mental health stress. But given everything, I don't know how political we can get here and how messy we can get here, but it's not okay to call people sinners. Whatever is happening, I can't use my oppression to oppress someone else. That's not okay. and how a neurodivergent or a disabled person experiences that emotional distress is very different from how a neurotypical person would experience. Everyone has different journeys, right? And again, when I say the feminist space, the mental health movement, the queer movement, sort of have unfortunately left behind disabled people. You go into queer spaces, you can't talk about disability. Sometimes you go into disabled spaces, you can't talk about queerness. And this I've experienced in different varying levels. I have seen that crowd. And I think we speak about it a bit with one of the episodes which we'll release in full later on. But that has happened. So everyone is talking about their oppression in silos. No, we're not thinking about collective liberation. We are not thinking about the commonality that exists between us as human beings. That is what's missing. Intersectionality is used kind of like to paint this picture, like holistic picture of how a person is oppressed, and just for like tokenistic gesture, people are included like in panels and stuff just to tick a box, but that's about it. The whole mental health discourse is created from a neurotypical and able-bodied lens. When people talk about disability, even neurotypicality is kind of like unsaid thing. It's expected. You think about disability, the first picture that comes into people's heads is like a person using a wheelchair, right? So invisible disabilities, nothing is talked about. And there sort of exists this hierarchy, right? So all of these conversations are happening in silos, and there's no like a cross movement has to be built, right? Solidarities have to be built, and that is what I see missing in the feminist space, which is again led by either savarna, cis het women, able-bodied women. It's like the corporate sector, you go and you see men, and then you come here, you see cis het savarna able-bodied women. They're just talking about the same things in the same circles, and I'm just fucking tired of it. I'm sorry. And that, yeah, that also, like my mentors and my seniors, like, you don't have to apologize. If it's hurting you, it's hurting you. But yeah, it's like there's no intersection. You talk about intersectionality. So when I say neuroqueerness, like I said, neuroqueerness has no fixed definition, right? It's that the idea is to challenge the binaries, to challenge the binary system that exists everywhere with regards to ability, with regards to gender, with regards to sexuality. Even these movements, like um, you know different movements, whatever is happening in the socio-political context, there are queer Muslims, there are queer disabled Muslims, there are queer disabled Christians, there are queer disabled Bahujan people, right? So it's not like just anti-caste movement, just anti-fascist movement. A lot of it is there, and that is what we're trying to do, because in the podcast also, Muslim people have come in, and queer Muslim people who live with different invisible disabilities, and they speak how it's challenging for them within that community as well. And it's important to talk about these things. And I don't say queer spaces aren't toxic or emotionally abusive. There's a lot of it, and that is also important work, that we need to look inwards within what is happening within our community, and it is okay to talk about it, not shut it down. That is a collective liberation, in the truest sense. So to me, it means all of those things. Like, you just can't fight for one right and leave behind the others. Yeah.
It makes me think about discussions we have around fault lines within our movements now. And sometimes we are so pressurized to like make feminism look good or make being queer look good in the external world, but and it's so hard to be able to come back and understand where are the spaces that we can actually talk about those things, where are the spaces where we can reflect on ourselves and grow, because we are all learning and growing, and we need to have that space to agree, disagree. And it seems I often feel that people assume that young people have so much space, you're all online, and you all must be talking to each other. And a lot of the time, I see that it is actually quite isolating to like be in this world with so many options of spaces to talk that you almost feel alone, which is interesting when you spoke about why you started Atypical Dekate. So, yeah, good reminder that we still need to connect and talk to each other. I want to now go to a couple of interconnections that I saw between both of your work and something that is interesting to me, narratives. And I'm going to call it narrative power because we're living in a world with a lot of kind of oppressions, multiple oppressions, and increasing challenges around the power of narratives to shift perspectives, to shape perspectives, particularly with young people, but also with many generations. You know, let's shout out to the WhatsApp uncles and aunties also in the power of shifting narratives. So I think both what I felt is that both of your work is really thinking about that narrative power. And I'm interested to know a little bit about, you know, each of your work sort of talks about stories, narratives, experiences, and what does that mean to you and to the communities and the people, the constituencies that you work with, and why is it very important? And I'll add my second question, which is who are these narratives intended to speak to? So if you can tell us a little bit about, you know, you're challenging the mainstream, and where do you see your narrative power in this huge, tough world of changing narratives? Does anyone, you want to start, Sanjana?
Earlier, Soumya and I were discussing this. Like, I told Soumya that, like, can you take this question first? Because I don't know what to say. But no, it's okay. No, it's fine. I thought of something in the meantime.
Both of you are like, we have nothing to say, and we've been talking for half an hour without you looking at your phones, by the way.
Yeah. Actually, it just reminded me of a conversation I was having last night with some friends about like the kind of narratives that we see, especially about like when, I'm going to talk about like films, books, TV shows. These are places where stories are, you know, like the kind of stories that are most accessible to the largest number of people. And I feel like a lot of the time, people who are marginalized are sort of performing stories. And there is a reason for that, because I think that in movements, propaganda is important as well. And it's important to, you know, like send a message and make a certain point. But I do feel like there's an element of like Savarna gaze constantly when we're thinking about making something of our own. Always thinking about like what Savarnas will think, what they'll say, how they'll police it, what their reactions will be. Will this actually, you know, change anything? Will this actually make them think? And I mean, obviously, those things are really important. But I do feel like sometimes the joy is lost. And I think that this feeling like we are not seen as complete human beings when it comes to telling stories, because then we kind of become one-dimensional, like symbols of trauma rather than, you know, actual complete human beings. And I feel like in terms of narrative power, I think it is something that we need to do as a movement, as like feminist movement, anti-caste movement, and even when it comes to neurodivergence, which is also something that, you know, I kind of think a lot about as someone with autism and ADHD. And I feel like we need to kind of tell stories for ourselves as well. You know, there needs to be something that like is fun, is joyous, and we do it for each other rather than the oppressor always, or like constantly worrying about. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of power structures at play here, and there are reasons why people do that. But there's also only a specific type of story or narrative that sells, and that's the narrative that, you know, like, is very, like, based on a lot of trauma porn and kind of maintaining status quo. And because things are shown in this way, and when people from privileged backgrounds watch it, they're like, oh, this is how these people are, this is how their lives are, and that's it, you know, that's the extent of it. And it should never stop there. That should not be the extent of the story of, like, I don't know, Bahujan queer person or like anybody. So I feel like, yeah, just making stories for ourselves and bringing the joy back. And if you look at Mavelinadu's art, I think that's a really important part of how we visualize things. And like the maximalism and the color and the joy is very much like it's very important to how we visualize like like the present or the past or an anti-caste future. So, and what was the second question? Sorry.
I think you covered it around what your idea of narrative power is and who your audience is. That's what I had asked.
In terms of as a publication, I think our audience is everyone. Like, there's no, I mean, it's like this book or this piece is meant for a particular community is not a thing that and we don't want to be a small niche mini publication, like a little magazine or whatever, like it's just not, that's not the idea. The point is to be big and reach as many people as possible, because I feel like in these types of in sort of like the NGO spaces and media spaces, there's like, you kind of siloize yourself into this like, okay, this is what we do and this is the kind of like academic tiny part of the discourse that we talk about, and we don't want to do that at all. Like, that's not helpful. That's not actually like engaging with a movement. That's just like trying to get funding, so yeah, so that's so it's for everyone.
I love this, eat
I
the
can
rich.
tell.
Eat the rich. Oh no, I love this. And also what you spoke about queer joy. That's also one of the things whenever we talk about the podcast. Yes, the heavier conversations are there, but also talking to each other, feeling a sense of like intimacy, that brings us joy. So if you'll actually listen, there are very heavy episodes as well, but you see the picture, it's very yellow, it's warm, it's inviting, it's that. And it was intentional that way. We just don't talk about trauma, because again we are re-victimizing ourselves, because the society is anyway otherizing and victimizing ourselves. So that was one part of it. And yesterday, actually, one of the guests who is in one of the episodes, she came in and she said this thing. We were talking about something about the network. So she was just saying that because of this, I could go and ask in my organization for accommodations, formal accommodations. So I didn't have very big dreams. I'm like, I'm a baby. There are so many people. मैं क्या कर लेगी? What will I do? So it was just for selfish reasons. Like I said, I started it, but it helped people, and those small things for individual people, very real. Changes in big ways and small, might be small for others, but for that individual it's a big thing, right? So those little things, that's the power that's there. Like, even going and asserting yourself, saying that under the RPWD Act I can ask for these rights, these are my legal rights, because I didn't know about that. When I was going through something tough, I couldn't assert myself. So those are the narrative shifts that I was actually holding on to keep doing it, keep pushing for it, because I have terrible imposter syndrome. I'm like, even yesterday I was telling people, like, there are so many big people out there, and I just feel like so out of place. And people were like, my friends were like trying to tell me, no, in 1 year, see how much it has reached. And it's still unbelievable for me, because it started from so much pain. I can't even, that was like a horrible period of time of my life. And so that is the, narrative change. Another small example, I was in November, there was this panel which happened because of conversations that I had had with someone months back. I just said ki, all these experienced or like middle-aged people come and talk about mental health and everything, but young people are going through so much in university spaces because of structural oppression of in workplaces, but young people are not getting any platform. And um, I also don't believe in the linear concept of age, because some of us came to know about who we are when we were 24, 27. So that threshold is also like it's difficult. Like, there are so many interplaying things which you need to consider. but you see all these experts coming in and talking about it. Why are not young people talking about their lived experiences? You don't know what is happening to a Shia queer Muslim woman. You don't know. There exists so much within Shia Sunni as well. So, and we don't know what is happening to folks in the Northeast, like Nishi tribe woman, and all these things exist, right? So I just had a conversation with someone, and they do this mental health festival every year in Delhi. So that conversation led to that panel, right? So these are the small changes that or like narrative shifts that I hold on to, because I don't know how much I can do, you know sorry, I can't imagine that big, but for me those tiny steps are like huge things. Like I'm doing material changes in this way, and that is what gives me hope and also the power to keep going. And as for the community, for me it's still very much for the community first, but then and it wasn't any promotional stuff or anything, but people found it helpful. Someone wanted to know about what their loved one is going through. Someone wanted to make a workplace more inclusive, integrate into the OD program. So it happened naturally. But for me, it was mostly for the community first, because we didn't have spaces and we need to reclaim that space. And I remember one of my guests was telling the same thing, because I keep questioning, should I take up these spaces? There are more people who are better suited for that. Like I also don't like when one person keeps taking up space, and again I'm very conscious of that. So I get like I shouldn't be taking up, but they're like, if you don't take it, someone else will take it, and our narratives will get behind. So it's like an internal struggle for me also, how much to do and when to step back. But yeah, it's a messy thing in my head. So I don't know if I answered your question, but yeah.
You did. It wasn't messy at all. I don't think it was messy. And I think imposter syndrome is real, exists. And as a retired young feminist, can I just say that I also feel it's like, I think both of you all are, thinking about where this work lands. Your first thought is in your communities, but I think there's so much of education that's happening within movements itself, that the knock-on effects of the work that you're doing are definitely visible and should continue. And it feels very, like, I know it feels very small, but I think there's huge potential for folks who stumble upon and learn about the neuroqueer baby that you are. Can I just say, while you were saying that, I was thinking of a little badge which was like neuroqueer baby. I thought it would be quite cool. And yeah, also really
March.
oops. And also, when you were talking, Sanjana, about trauma and like the idea of, folks telling their stories only through trauma, it reminded me of, I'm also from the same community, the Irawa community, where this story of Nangeli, have you heard of it? Oh my, the breast tax and the cutting off of the breasts. And honestly, like growing up, I never heard that. And then suddenly it was on every feminist platform in my 20s. And, for me, it was really weird to like suddenly associate myself with this story of, and of course, I'm not taking away from that story, but it was literally everywhere.
It's become big
It
now.
has
It's
become
like-
big. And so the way I introduce, oh, what caste are you from? I'm like, that woman who cut off her breast, like I'm from that. And it's really sad that we have to talk about it in that way. And my sister is actually a children's book writer. And we've been talking about this, and she's been thinking about this, about how to write stories for us, for our kids, for the next generation, about the struggles, and not just the struggles, but the victories, because, we were oppressed, but hey, we can also be the oppressor. So, I think also thinking about our caste as in a more nuanced way, not sort of thinking of, let's put all the DBA people in one bracket, because a lot of people from our community are extremely right wing and are actually oppressing themselves. And so, yes, I just want to see how many people where they voted last year from my extended family. So I think it's so important to talk about these nuances, and also not like, paint ourselves with one brush. And I feel like both of you have really like showed us how to do that. Do we have time for one more question, or open? I had one last question about. I'll integrate like maybe an opening, but also like maybe an ending could also be all. I actually had this very nice quote from the Mavelinadu website, which was about um, reimagining our world as we would like to see it. And I think both of you touched on it a little bit through your discussions about the joy, but like, yeah, what would that world look like to you? A world where you could just reimagine. I mean, Mavelinadu does it in a very visual way, but maybe a line about, how you see the world ahead. How would you like to see the world? I know it sounds very like flu-fla, but, say whatever you like.
So in an ideal world, nothing would exist. Like the oppressive systems won't exist at all. But I'd again go back to concepts like collective care and community care. It's very important as vulnerable individuals. And given that we come from these marginalized identities, we have our own trauma, and it's a very political space, right? So we will hurt each other. Yeah. But how we are going to transform that pain and trauma into solidarities and intimacy is the work that we have to do. That is the world that I envision. Not, people say more power to you. I say, no, don't wish me power. Wish me softness, kindness, love. I want those things. That is the ideal world I would imagine, because even like the therapeutic space, and given, sorry if I'm going too political, but like given the therapeutic space, a lot of discourse is happening like we shouldn't be talking about politics in the therapy space. It's for healing. Like all my trauma is from being queer and autistic. Yeah. So it's inherently political. How do I diverse politics from the mental health space? And, therapy is a very political space according to me. And I don't know how we can diverse that. So we have to do our own healing as well for the community. Have to practice self accountability, mutual accountability, and just transform that pain into love and warmth. That's how I would imagine it to be.
I mean, that's the perfect answer. And I think just to add to that, not from my own perspective, because I think a lot of the work that we've done with Mavelinadu kind of deals with this, like, what we would envision the world as. And Mavelinadu itself is that idea, is that it like symbolizes a world where there's equality, there is no casteism, there's no gender discrimination, there's no like malnutrition, disease, and all of those things only come from the annihilation of caste and other oppressive structures. So like whatever you said, and also adding on to that the imaginations of other anti-caste writers and intellectuals who've come before, like Phule's Bali Rajas, which is the same as Mavelinadu, or Begumpura, which is Ravi Das's Utopia, and there's Prabhupada. There are so many of these, like, that just, I mean, there's so much to take from that's already been written, and also kind of everything that you said plus that. So.
Amazing. That was the end of my questions. Do we have time for?
So one of the things that I have wanted to do for a long time and I've pushed is create stuff in Odia. My mother tongue is Odia. And I didn't have access to all this language, vocabulary, what is asexuality until 2018-19. So I do understand that. I tried to make a small video on understanding disability in Odia, and there's no language. The psychologist, we're having these discussions. How do we explain disability? Because again, the same terms exist, like bhinnakhyama in Odia, right? So differently abled, and you understand in English how that's problematic, right? You're otherizing them. So I completely agree on that. Yesterday's drag story reading thing that was there. So there was a person who came and the kids were there, and we were reading stories. I have friends who work in community libraries. Rituparna in Assam, she works, and these storytelling, spaces. We don't have to use these terms. We can just say stories, talk about emotions. I remember when I've done these workshops with college kids, we talk about emotions. Nobody asks us, how are you feeling? You can start from there and build empathy and solidarity, right? We don't need to do. And about schools, again, my friends who are working in inclusive education, in training, they tell me, sometimes we go to these spaces and they are like, "Ki, why do we need to talk about it?" Because parents are like, iske bare mein baat nahi karna, we don't want to talk about it. So there's a lot of pushback, and even in big cities like in Delhi, in Bangalore, it exists. And the awareness has to be created, discussions have to be started. Sex education is important, but there's a pushback from parents, teachers. And disability ka to koi nishan hi nahi hai. Like, about queer issues, about sex education, something is being done. But about disability, about non-visible disabilities, dyslexia, dysgraphia, what is it? People don't know how kids are struggling. So yeah, we really need to push for inclusive education first, because school is a ground for CPTSD. I mean, I'm laughing about it right now. I remember how much I have cried. But we really need to push for inclusive education because it starts there. Yeah. You see.
As far as, I mean, we're always working towards translations as much as possible. That's one thing. And also at Mavelinadu, we were hoping in the future to do children's books that kind of like deal with these things. But that's, I mean, it's a future project. For now, as far as like, my experience of working in feminist NGOs, like in the past, I've seen that Tarshi's resources are pretty good. In like Hindi and in English. I don't know if they have other languages, but they have books for like different ages, like starting from very young. And actually, I remember it's been going on for so long. I remember my parents gave me one of these books when I was like 10 or 11 years old that kind of introduced me to sex and sex education, which was weirdly progressive. But they never spoke a word to me. They just threw the book at me and like, here, just read this. But yeah, they do have good resources, so that's suggestion for anyone.
I also know of Narrative Practices Collective, which is doing some great work with therapists and with others around talking about caste, sexuality within the mental health space. I've attended an introduction to narrative practices, and I found it really great. They use children's books as means to talk about these things. Yeah. So we're at the end of our conversation. Wasn't so hard, was it? Thank you both, and thanks to the collective. I know you're here on behalf of the collective. Thank you, Soumya, for sharing your thoughts. I learned a lot, and yeah, look forward to seeing all of your work grow and sharing and learning together ahead. So, and thanks everyone for your questions and comments, and thank you to our interpreters, ISL interpreters, Renu and Rajesh. Interestingly, sidebar, we were talking about signing de-Brahmanizing gender before we went into this session. So also highlighting the need to think about how we speak about this language in different, not just languages, but also in sign language. And yeah, for me, I think language is important. Even if it's hard, we must continue to use the hard language and I think we cannot assume that people will understand only simple language, you know. Somehow I think we're sort of assuming that people won't understand, so we need to compromise on our language. But language is power, and you know, everyone can learn and read. So let's continue to hold on to our language too. Thanks everyone.
Thank you.